So far, we've covered the general organization of the GI tract and as well as the five basic functions of the GI tract. And now we will cover the structure of the GI wall. And it's important because form matches function in the human body, and so the histology and physiology closely match each other, and especially in the GI tract. And so let's just jump right into this. And we have three basic structures that we need to think about: mucosa, submucosa, and muscularis externa. And before I go talk more about it, let's talk about where they are and how they're located. So here's the general tube, let's say, the tube of the GI tract. You can think of it as a tube. And and so we see that there's a mesentery. Mesentery is basically there's two epithelial sides, epithelium here, and connective tissue in between, sandwich. It's like two skins sandwiched together, and it's to hold everything in place, hold it in the body. Um, and then we also see serosa and adventitia. They're on the very outside, the outskirts, very distally from the lumen. And these are serosa and adventitia are just basically fancy words for connective tissue. Um, so now that we've got those out of the way, let's talk about the GI wall. And so, in a, when we're dealing with a cavity in the human body, that's the cavity is the proximal, most proximal, and as we move out, we're moving distally. So it could be the blood vessel, it could be GI tract, anything. It's this is the cavity is the most proximal, and we move distally. So the lumen is the middle in the middle, and it's where all the food uh, passes through, and if it's a blood vessel, it's blood and plasma. But and as we move out, we'll cover the three different layers. We'll cover mucosa, the submucosa, and the muscularis externa. So the we see in the mucosa layer, there's three. There are three. There are three structures consisting of mucosa, and we see that there's an epithelium. Oops, let me just the colors right. So we see that there is an epithelium. We see there's lamina propria, which is just connective tissue, a loose connective tissue. And we also see muscularis mucosa. So muscularis mucosa. It's a smooth muscle layer. And this is in order. This is this is proximally, and as we're moving distally, this is what we see: epithelium, lamina propria, muscularis mucosa, making the very basement of the mucosal layer. And then as we move towards the submucosa, we have primarily have two components. There's blood. It contains blood and lymphatic vessels. And we also see some mucosal nerve plexus. And plexus is just a group of nerves. Uh, and then as we move further down, we have muscularis externa. Muscularis externa. color doesn't want to change. There you go. We have a circular muscle layer, muscle layer. Then we have a myenteric nerve plexus, plexus. And then we have a longitudinal muscle layer. So again, we're moving down. It's in order. Circular, and then the nerve plexus is sandwiched between the two muscle layers. And so we'll see that. So here we have the epithelium sits on the very edge. It's the interface. It interfaces with the lumen. And so we'll see that the epithelium varies along the GI tract, and it varies for a reason. It's because it's has a specific function at that point in the GI tract. There's there's something going on with the food that you have to either move it, and you're not concerned with digestion, so the epithelium will match that function. And then as we get into intestine, we're more concerned with secretion and absorption. So then the epithelium will match that function. Uh, so the form and function match closely. And then what we see below the epithelium layer is lamina propria. Lamina propria sits right here in this gray area. And that is just loose connective tissue. And in the mucosa, it has glands, and we see there's glands right here, and then at the very basement of the mucosal layer is the submucosal uh, the muscularis mucosa. And this is just smooth muscle that sits at the bottom basement, and this could help in terms of um, of contracting glands or contracting um, having smooth muscle that extends into the primarily it helps in contracting glands, and it might also help with contracting villi. Um, I don't recall. I'll get back to you on that one. And then we have um, then below that we have the submucosa. So let me just clean this up for you. Submucosa just sits between the musculars. This is the muscularis mucosa, and this is circular muscle right here. So it sits between. And the submucosa, as the name implies, is below the mucosa. And it contains, as we talked about, it contains blood vessels and lymphatic vessels, as well as a submucosal nerve plexus, which will interact with glands and um, and the muscularis mucosa layer. It'll innervate the muscularis mucosa. And then we have the last layer, the most distal layer, is the muscularis externa. Muscularis externa in includes a circular layer, as the name suggests. It's circular. It wraps around this tube, and then we have longitudinal. We'll skip the nerve for now. We have a longitudinal muscle, which is going in and it's perpendicular to the surface of this paper, and so it's going in and out of the screen, and it's going in and out of this screen. So I'm just drawing little dots to indicate that in that direction. And then in between these two layers of muscles sits the myenteric nerve plexus. And the myenteric nerve plexus, as the name implies, uh, innervates these two muscles. And so you could guess what that the muscularis externa is heavily involved in motility, which is what we talked about last time. So anyway, let's so just to I'll show you 3 layers again. There's mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and these are the subcomponents of each layer. So I'll give you more histological. Oops. I'll give you a more histological uh, picture. And this is a cross section of the duodenum, but we'll use this as an example. And that we see that this entire layer is the mucosal layer. And we see that there's an epithelium at the very tips of the villi. These are villi. And we see mucosa, we see the epithelium goes all along at the interface of the lumen. And then we see a lamina propria, which sits is this loose connective tissue here. And there's lymphatic and blood vessels in here uh, that drain down to the submucosal layer. And then we also see the muscularis uh, mucosa, which sits right here. So you can see how it's connected to this, and it will help in terms of contraction of glands or the villi. Now we further distally we see the submucosa. And the submucosa contains primarily blood vessels and lymphatics, as well as the submucosal nerve plexus. And as you could imagine, the nerve, if the nerves are here, then you could see that it's innervating the blood vessels, the lymphatics, or excuse me, blood vessels, and even some glands. We'll see it as we see soon. Ma Majority of the submucosa along the GI tract does not have glands, but in specific areas, in the esophagus and the duodenum, we see glands. So these are glands. These are glands right here. We see a crypt right here. And so and that these all sit in the submucosal layer. And now if we go even further down, we see the muscularis externa, and this is muscularis externa, and we see the circular layer. This is a cross section in which the circular layer is wraps around the tube, and then we see a longitudinal layer that goes along the tube, and then we see right here nerve plex nerve plexuses that innervate the two muscle layers. So circular muscle, um, myenteric nerve plexus, and then longitudinal muscle. These are all smooth muscles. So here's a really nice picture of this histological organization of the digestive tube. And we see along here that we see the esophagus, stomach, the intestine. This is small intestine. And then the colon or the large intestine. And then along here we see mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and adventitia serosa, which is a connective tissue that is holding all this together. So we have a kind of a matrix here, And we see that along the different lengths, there's different components at each level of each depth. Uh, so here we see, so the esophagus is primarily for moving food. You're not concerned with digesting. It's not reached the stomach yet. So we're just moving food. And so we see stratified squamous epithelium here. It's not meant for absorption. Uh, and the villi here, these are villi right here, and they contain on their surface columnar epithelial cells. Columnar because they're long, because they need to make more proteins. They need more space. Uh, they're absorbing stuff. They're storing stuff. They're protecting. So you have so the epithelial layer along the GI tract changes according to what's the function at that point. So an esophagus stratifies squamous epithelial to protect the lining of the esophagus and help in passage of the food to the stomach. And then we see uh, mucosal gland. This is the mucosal gland right here, and a submucosal gland right here. And they aid in the passage, like secreting mucus. Uh, and so that's so that nothing too much exciting going on in the muscularis externa layer. Um, and we see these nerve plexuses again. Meissner's is just another fancy doctor term for the submucosal nerve plexus, and Auerbach is again the doctory word for myenteric nerve plexus. I guess they're both doctory words, but uh, there's just unnecessary redundancy. So here again we have stomach. The stomach, we have gastric pits. These pits are invagination of the epithelial lining into the mucosal layer. So we see that typically a gastric pit has one opening into the gastric cavity, and then there's two pits that run along parallel that connects to this common opening. So these are gastric glands. Uh, there's a variety of cells, different types of cells that secrete hormones and enzymes, and we'll talk more about that later. And then in the duodenum we have villi. We have villi. For these villi, these the reason we have villi are is to increase the surface area. Why would you want to increase surface area? Well, we've digested the food in the stomach and it's passed into the intestine, and we need to absorb it, absorb the nutrients, absorb all the good stuff. So we have more surface area. So we have more area to absorb nutrients. So this adds to effectiveness and efficiency to our body. And and then we have these crypts uh, that extend down into the mucosal layer, or these are crypts or glands you want to call them. And then we also have at the basement of these crypts are more glands. So as I said before, this is Brunner's gland, and as I said before, along a lot majority of the part of the intestine, there's no glands in the submucosal layer, except in the esophagus and the duodenum. We see there's two glands, and the Brunner's gland is particular to the duodenum. So these are signals. If you're looking at histological slides, these are signals that where you are in along the GI tract. And as we continue, the villi, uh, we see villi, and when we get into this right here is just a pancreatic and liver secretions, and we'll talk more about that. And then as we move along into in the intestine, we see in the ileum. So we've finished majority of our absorption in the duodenum and jejunum, and we are starting to see uh, these little patches. These are Peyer's patches. Um, these are patches of of our uh, immunological system, and they're meant to protect our body from foreign uh, um, bacteria or foreign particles. And so as we move on, we see the colon has no villi. We don't need to absorb anything. We're mostly we might be absorbing salts or water and concentrating the the food so that way we or bolus so that we are in preparation to expel it. So and again, there's glands here, and that's about it for our structure of the GI wall. So this is a good feature, a good diagram.